When I came home that afternoon, my bed was gone, and my daughter-in-law was smiling in it. My son stood beside her, arms crossed, saying, "Dad, relax. It's our room now." I didn't yell. I didn't even blink. I just looked around at the walls I'd painted with my own hands, the ones my wife once touched, and realized they'd chosen the wrong old man to move. My name is Thomas Bennett, 72 years old, retired shop teacher, builder of this house, brick by brick after my wife Helen died. Every beam carries her memory, every nail a promise. She always told me, "Make sure it feels like home even when I'm gone." For years I did. Quiet mornings, a black coffee, the sound of birds by the window. Peace. Then 3 years ago, my son Michael asked to move back in with his wife Victoria. Just for a while, he said. I believed him. Maybe I missed the noise of family. Maybe I was too hopeful to see what silence had protected me from. At first it was pleasant. She cooked, he laughed, the house felt alive again. But slowly the warmth shifted. My photographs disappeared. The furniture moved. Their laughter started echoing in rooms that used to be mine. People think betrayal comes with shouting. It doesn't. It comes quietly with polite smiles and redecorated walls. That day when I found my bed gone, I didn't argue. I just stood there calm as stone and thought, they've mistaken my silence for surrender. They were wrong. After Helen passed, the house became too quiet. The kind of silence that seeps into your bones, filling every hallway with memories you can't touch. For years I lived in that quiet. It was lonely, yes, but it was honest. Then one rainy night, my son Michael called. He said things hadn't gone well with work, that he and Victoria just needed a place to stay for a few months. I didn't hesitate. I told him to come home. I thought maybe the walls would feel warmer again. I didn't realize I was opening the door for something colder than loneliness entitlement. The first few months felt good. Victoria was charming in that polished way some people practice in front of mirrors. She called me Dad with a bright smile, always made sure my coffee mug was full, laughed at all my old stories as if she cared. I wanted to believe she did. I wanted to believe family could still mean safety. Michael and I had our small rituals. A beer on the porch at dusk. He'd tell me about his new projects, his dreams of starting a business. I saw the same fire in him I once had when I was his age before time sanded down my edges. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with that quiet mix of love and guilt, like he wanted to say thank you, but couldn't find the words. Maybe he knew even then what was coming. It started small. One morning I noticed my old armchair was gone from the living room. In its place was a sleek white sofa that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When I asked, Victoria smiled. Oh, that old chair didn't go with the new color palette. Color palette? She said it like my memories were outdated furniture. I didn't argue. I told myself, let them have their fun. But when the clock Helen had hung above the mantel disappeared too, something inside me tightened. Then came the paint. Gray walls. Gray where there once had been soft peach and sunlight. I came home one afternoon and smelled fresh paint and perfume, the kind that doesn't linger for comfort, but for control. They'd painted over Helen's touch. Over years of quiet devotion, over the last piece of her that made this place feel alive. Still, I stayed calm. When your old people mistake silence for weakness, but silence when used right becomes a weapon sharper than words. I watched, I listened, and I waited. Victoria began holding small dinners, her friends from town, all smiles and wine and shallow praise. They'd sit around the table Helen and I built together and compliment Victoria's design sense. Not once did anyone ask who built the house they were sitting in. That's how erasure works, not by theft, but by polite omission. Michael started changing too. Less laughter, more hesitation. When I'd bring something up, he'd sigh, rub his neck and say, Dad, it's just temporary. Vic wants to make it feel like a home for everyone. Everyone except the man who paid for it. I tried to reason with him gently. You remember what your mother said, I told him one evening as we sat on the porch. He looked away, eyes fixed on the fading light. She said, love is a home, Dad, not the walls around it. I nodded. Yes, but she never said love should bulldoze the walls someone else built. He didn't answer. The next morning I found a pile of unopened mail in the kitchen drawer. Bills, bank statements, a few strange envelopes addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. Michael brushed it off. Oh, Vic was organizing things. Organizing. That word stayed with me. By the time I left for my 2-week fishing trip up north, I could already feel the house slipping away. I told Michael, "Take care of this place. It's not just wooden walls, it's our story." He smiled like he understood. He didn't. 15 days later, I came home. The air smelled different, not of coffee or polish or the faint rose perfume Helen used to wear. No, it smelled like new paint and ownership. I looked around and for a brief, painful moment, I didn't recognize my own home. The photos on the wall were gone. The grandfather clock gone. The wooden cross Helen had carved by hand gone. Her voice, her warmth, all replaced by the sound of heels clicking upstairs. When I opened the bedroom door, I stopped breathing. The bed Helen and I shared for 25 years gone. In its place stood a glossy designer bed, white and cold, covered in pillows that looked untouched by life. The peach walls were painted gray. Even the curtains had been replaced. Every trace of us was erased. Then Victoria appeared in the doorway, smiling, wearing my wife's pearl earrings. "Do you like it, Dad?" she asked, her voice sweet and soft like poison. "We redecorated. This room just fits us better." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my fingers gripping the doorframe to stop them from shaking. For a second, I wanted to shout, to ask how she could stand in the ruins of my marriage and call it modern, but I stayed still. Stillness unsettles people more than shouting ever will. When I asked where my bed was, she said it was safe in the garage. Safe, as if dignity could be stored next to old tools and paint cans. She told me to sleep in the guest room, said it would be better for my back at my age. At my age. It wasn't just a remark. It was a crown of thorns wrapped in politeness. When I asked why they didn't tell me, she laughed. "Michael said you'd understand. We wanted to surprise you." A surprise, yes, betrayal dressed in a bow. Later, when Michael came downstairs, he looked tired, hollow. "Hey, Dad," he said softly. "You're home early." "Early?" I asked. "I said I'd be back today." He looked at the floor. "Vic thought you'd like the changes. The room needed a fresh start," he added. "Fresh start? For whom?" I asked him. "You let her move my things without asking." He rubbed the back of his neck, the same nervous tic he had when he broke the window as a boy. "Dad, it's still your house," he said. "We live here too. Vic just wanted to make it feel like home for both of us." Home. The word hit me like a slap. "My home," I said quietly, "built by my hands, paid for with my years." He looked lost. "Dad, don't make this a thing. We're starting a family soon." "Then start it somewhere else," I said, my voice steady. "If you need space, find your own place." He froze. Then Victoria reappeared, holding a glass of wine like a prop. "Thomas," she said smoothly, "let's not overreact. We didn't throw your things away. They're safe." "Safe?" I asked. "In the garage," she said, smiling. "We even kept your old dresser." I didn't say a word. I walked down the stairs, the two of them following behind me. The air in the garage was cold, heavy, with the smell of dust and oil. There it was, the dresser Helen once polished every spring. Leaning against the wall, its mirror cracked. Boxes marked Dad's stuff stacked like tombstones, and in one of them the photo of Helen and me, her smile split clean through by the crack in the glass. Victoria sipped her wine. "See? We kept everything." I turned to her, my voice barely above a whisper. "You kept the furniture," I said, "but you threw away respect." The air went still. Neither of them spoke. In that silence, something inside me hardened. I picked up the photo, brushed the dust from Helen's face, and whispered, "Patience, love. Just patience." Because I knew one thing for certain: they had no idea what kind of man I used to be, and they were about to find out. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table under the old yellow lamp, its weak light spilling over the cracked photo of Helen I'd pulled from the garage. Her face, half lit, half shadowed, seemed to be watching me. I could almost hear her voice, "Patience, Thomas. Let people show you who they are." The house was quiet, too quiet. Every sound carried meaning, now the hum of the fridge, the drip of the old pipe, the muffled laughter from upstairs where they slept in my room. That sound, that soft, mocking laughter, felt like a blade carving through everything I'd built. But anger is a luxury for the unprepared. I'd learned long ago, when people take from you, don't shout, document. So I began. I pulled out a notebook from the drawer and wrote down everything I'd noticed since they moved in. Dates, conversations, changes, bank envelopes that went missing, and Victoria's words, "It'll be legally ours." That line echoed in my head like thunder. Legally ours. The next morning I woke before sunrise as I always did. The sky was pale, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I brewed a cup of black coffee and sat by the window pretending to read the paper while my mind worked quietly. I needed proof. Not feelings, not memories, proof. When Victoria came downstairs in her robe, she smiled like nothing had happened. "Morning. Thomas," she said, pouring herself a glass of juice. "Sleep well in the guest room." I smiled faintly, like a rock. She laughed, not realizing how close she was to being buried by her own arrogance. Michael followed soon after, half-dressed, avoiding eye contact. He mumbled something about running errands and left. Victoria stayed humming to herself as she scrolled through her phone. Her perfume filled the room, sweet synthetic, suffocating. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk around the yard. The maple trees were turning red and gold, their leaves drifting onto Helen's old swing. Victoria's modern metal bench sat nearby, cold and lifeless. I looked at it and thought, that's her taste, shiny, hollow, replaceable. And then I heard her voice. Behind the house, near the fence, she was pacing on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, not at first, but her words sliced through the wind. "Once the renovations are done, it'll be legally ours," she said, laughing. Pause. "He's old Karen. He won't fight it. Once we've made enough improvements, we can file a claim for possession." I already talked to someone. My blood froze. It wasn't disrespect anymore. It was theft, planned, rehearsed, confident. I pulled out my phone, pressed record, and let her own voice hang herself. When she hung up, I stepped back into the house, calm but burning inside. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I've seen what anger does. It warns your enemies you're awake. I wasn't giving her that gift. That evening after they left for dinner, I walked into Michael's small study. The desk was cluttered with bills, receipts, and something else, a loan statement I didn't recognize. My eyes stopped at the line that made my hands shake. Secured against property, 214 Brookhaven Road. My house. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but the middle initial was wrong. A forgery. For a long time, I just sat there staring at it, hearing the old clock tick above me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was simply awake. When you spend your life building things, you learn to recognize structure, and this was a structure of deceit. Piece by piece, they were trying to take the foundation of my life. But I'd built stronger things than they'd ever imagined. I took the papers, made copies, and placed them in a sealed folder. Then I picked up Helen's photo from the table. "Patience, love," I whispered. "Even storms pass if you wait them out." The next morning, I made a call I hadn't made in years. "Grace," I said softly when she answered. There was a pause. "Dad, is everything okay?" I hadn't realized how much I missed her voice until that moment. "Not exactly," I said. Then I told her everything slowly, carefully, leaving nothing out. The redecorating, the erased memories, the forged signature, Victoria's phone call. By the end, my voice had gone quiet. Grace didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Don't do anything yet. I'll handle it. Promise me you won't confront them until I get there." I promised. For the next 2 days, I became someone else. I smiled at breakfast. I fixed the leaky faucet. I even complimented Victoria's new curtains. I played the part of a harmless old man because sometimes disguise is the best armor. Inside, though, I was moving like clockwork. Every night I sat by the window writing down every detail. Dates, conversations, screenshots of messages on the shared Wi-Fi, copies of the bank mail I found hidden in drawers. By the time Grace's car pulled into the driveway 3 days later, my quiet routine had turned into a case file. She stepped out in a gray suit, calm and composed like her mother used to be. When she hugged me, she whispered, "We'll fix this." I handed her the folder labeled House Records. She went through every page, her expression tightening with each one. When she finished, she looked up, eyes sharp and clear. "Dad, she said you've got them." Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in a long time, certainty. That night we worked together at the kitchen table, the same table Helen once used for Sunday dinners. Now it was covered in documents, receipts, and a laptop glowing with quiet fury. Grace moved like a surgeon, precise, patient, unflinching. Every few minutes she'd scribble notes, highlight lines, or murmur to herself. "Not just forgery," she said at one point. This is elder financial abuse. The bank will fold once they see this. I watched her work, pride and grief mixing inside me. Helen would have been proud of her, of the steadiness she inherited. I poured her another coffee and said, "We'll do this clean." No anger. Grace smiled faintly. "Exactly. We'll win quietly." The next morning I went about my day like nothing had changed. When Victoria floated down the stairs in her silk robe, she smiled. "Morning, Thomas. Sleep well in the guest room," I nodded, like a baby. She didn't notice the small black folder sitting on the counter or Grace's car parked down the block. Over the next 2 days, Grace gathered every thread we needed. The notarized deed, the recording of Victoria's phone call, the bank statement with the forgery. She even contacted the bank manager herself. When she hung up, she turned to me and said, "Dad, the fraud department is on it. All we need now is their confession or their silence." That evening, as the sky dimmed, Michael came into the kitchen. His eyes were tired. "Dad, can we talk?" he said softly. I nodded. "Of course." He hesitated, glancing at the stairs to make sure Victoria wasn't there. "She said you were being difficult," he murmured. "But I didn't realize she moved your stuff. I should have stopped it." For a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who cried when he accidentally broke Helen's vase. "Michael," I said quietly, "you forged my name on a loan." His face fell. "Dad, I didn't mean." "You didn't mean to get caught," I said. "But you still did it." He ran his hand through his hair, eyes glassy. "I just wanted to make her happy. She said it was temporary. We'd pay it back before you ever found out." "Temporary theft," I said, my voice steady, "is still theft." Before he could answer, Grace stepped in holding the folder. "Michael," she said calmly, "we know everything." He froze. "This is forgery. This is fraud. And this," she held up her phone, "is Victoria plotting to steal the house." He went pale. "We could press charges," she continued, "but we're giving you one chance to fix it." At that exact moment, Victoria appeared in the doorway, voice sharp. "What's going on here?" Grace didn't even look up. "You have 48 hours to vacate this property," she said. "Sign the agreement and leave clean or stay and face court." Victoria's smile faltered. "You can't throw us out," she hissed. I finally spoke. "I can," I said quietly, "and I will." She turned to Michael, but he couldn't meet her eyes. That silence was louder than any argument. Grace slid the pen across the table. "Your choice," she said. Victoria's hand shook as she signed. Michael followed his signature, trembling. Grace gathered the papers, tucked them into her folder, and said simply, "We're done here." They stood frozen for a moment. Then Victoria broke the silence. "You're bluffing." I looked her in the eye. "I was patient," I said. "Now I'm finished." The silence that followed Grace's words was heavy enough to drown in. Victoria's face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. Michael stared at the papers, his hands trembling. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, no longer the son I once carried on my shoulders, but a man cornered by his own choices. Victoria was the first to break. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This is our home, too." I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. "No," I said. "It never was." Grace gathered the folder and stood, her tone professional, almost surgical. "The agreement is notarized, filed with the county clerk. 48 hours, Mrs. Bennett. Don't test that timeline." Victoria blinked her eyes, darting toward Michael, searching for backup. He didn't meet her gaze. For the first time in years, he looked at me instead. "Dad," he started, his voice breaking. I raised my hand slightly. "No excuses, son. Just decisions." That ended it. They left the kitchen without another word. I stayed seated, staring at the faint scratches on the wooden table marks Helen made years ago when she kneaded bread for Sunday mornings. Even scars can tell stories if you let them. Upstairs, I could hear drawers slamming, footsteps, and Victoria's muffled voice still arguing. It didn't matter anymore. Justice had already spoken in the quietest way possible, on paper and ink, with signatures that couldn't be erased. 2 days passed in strange, unfamiliar calm. Not peace yet, but the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when you're not sure if it's really over. I went about my days as usual, coffee at dawn, feeding the birds, checking the garden. It felt almost absurd acting normal while 2 people packed their broken ambitions into cardboard boxes. But there was power in that normalcy. They could take my bed, repaint my walls, even forge my name, but they couldn't dictate my composure. On the second evening, a moving truck pulled up. The sound of metal doors rolling open echoed through the neighborhood. Victoria came down first, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She carried a suitcase in each hand, the kind of expensive luggage people buy to convince the world they're doing fine. Behind her, Michael followed, shoulders slumped, carrying only a few small boxes. When they reached the porch, I was already there, standing under the amber light. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, Michael set the boxes down. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked at the lines of guilt carved deep into his face, at the exhaustion of a man who'd built his life on someone else's silence. "I know," I said. He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I nodded slowly. "You thought love meant saying yes. It doesn't. It means knowing when to say enough." Victoria turned away, tears shining in her eyes, but pride refusing to fall. She didn't say goodbye. She just climbed into the truck and shut the door. Michael lingered for a moment longer. "I just wanted her to be happy," he whispered. "And you thought risking your father's home would make that happen?" He looked down, shame washing over him. "Son," I said gently, "you can rebuild, but start with truth. It's lighter to carry." He nodded once, then walked to the truck. The engine started. The taillights glowed red against the dusk. And then they were gone. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was pure, clean. For the first time in months, the house breathed again. I walked through each room, touching the walls, feeling their stillness. When I opened the door to my old bedroom, the air was cool and still. The bed frame leaned against the wall, waiting for me to rebuild it. The boxes labeled Dad's stuff sat quietly in the corner, as if they'd been holding their breath for me to return. I unwrapped the cracked photo of Helen and replaced the broken glass. When I hung it back on the wall right where it used to be, I whispered, "Welcome home." That night, Grace and I made pancakes for dinner. She laughed as she flipped them, saying it felt strange to hear laughter echo through the house again. "It feels lighter, doesn't it?" she asked. "It does," I said, like the walls finally exhaled. Weeks passed. Word spread fast in small towns. Michael's company found out about the forgery. He was demoted, his wages garnished to repay the $27,500 loan. Victoria started working at a small real estate office 2 towns over. Eventually, they separated. I didn't rejoice. Not really. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing life had restored its balance. Months later, on a Sunday evening, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Michael was standing there, thinner, older, holding an envelope. He didn't say much. "I wanted you to have this," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a check, his first full repayment installment. "I'm trying, Dad," he said softly. I nodded. "Good. Keep trying." He looked around the house, his eyes settling on the photo of Helen above the fireplace. "You fixed the room," he said quietly. "I did," I replied. "And this time it stays mine." He smiled faintly, then turned and walked away. I watched him go, his silhouette fading into the orange evening. When the door closed behind him, the peace that filled the room was deep, not the silence of loss, but the stillness of restoration. Later that night, I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the trees sway gently under the moonlight. I realized something: the opposite of revenge isn't forgiveness, it's clarity. Forgiveness frees your heart. Clarity guards it from being hurt again. People talk about revenge like it's fire, but fire burns everyone who stands too close. What I've learned is simpler, colder, truer, real revenge is peace. It's the kind that doesn't need applause or witnesses. It's when the world finally goes quiet and you can breathe again. I turned off the lights, walked to my bedroom, and opened the window. The night breeze carried the faint scent of Helen's roses. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt the house recognize me again. It was home once more. For a while, peace became my closest companion. Mornings passed quietly, the soft whistle of the kettle, the creak of the old porch swing, the steady rhythm of life, returning to its rightful pace. I thought the storm had gone. I was wrong. 12 years of silence can make a man forget what certain voices sound like. Until one morning that silence shattered with the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I looked through the window and saw a black SUV glinting under the sun. 2 figures stepped out, one familiar, one foreign. Clara, my daughter. She hadn't visited since the day she married Daniel. Not a call, not a letter, not even a postcard. Just 12 long years of distance. She had been my light once, my girl who used to run barefoot through the yard, sawdust in her hair, laughter, chasing every step. And now here she was standing at my door, wearing oversized sunglasses and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Dad, she said sweetly, the same tone she used when she was little and wanted something. It's been so long. 12 years, I thought. Long enough for a heart to harden. Behind her, Daniel followed, dragging 2 large leather suitcases, the kind you buy when you want to look successful, not because you travel often. He had the posture of a man who measured everything, including people. I opened the door but didn't move aside. For a second, I saw the faintest flicker of discomfort in her eyes. Then she smiled wider like a politician before a speech. "You look good, Dad. The house? It's beautiful," she said, already peering past me into the living room, as if she owned the place. I forced a smile. "Come in." They walked through the doorway like they belonged there. Daniel's eyes scanned the walls, the furniture, the photos, calculating, not admiring. It wasn't nostalgia I saw in them. It was valuation. I offered them coffee, though I already knew they weren't here for coffee. They sat at the kitchen table where so many of my memories lived. Clara brushed invisible dust off her sleeve, looked around and said softly, "It must be lonely here all by yourself." I sipped my coffee. I've learned to like the quiet. She smiled, that same polite, rehearsed smile. "Dad, we heard about your good fortune. Daniel and I were just talking. We think it's not safe for you to handle everything alone. People might try to take advantage." I almost laughed. People like who? Daniel jumped in before I could answer. "Thomas, we've had a rough few years. My firm took some losses. Markets are unpredictable. We just thought maybe it would be good for everyone if we stayed here a while. Family should be together, right?" There it was, the ask, wrapped neatly in concern. I set my cup down slowly, the porcelain clicking against the table. "So you're saying you want to move in?" Clara hesitated for a moment, then smiled like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "Just until things stabilize. You've got the space. It'll be good for all of us." I looked at her hands, no wedding ring, just manicured nails and the faint tremor of someone used to hiding panic under polish. "When was the last time you called me, Clara?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "What do you remember?" I said. "Was it your 30th birthday or the Christmas you didn't come home?" Her jaw tightened. "Dad, please. Let's not rehash the past. The past," I said, "is what brought you here." The air between us changed. Daniel leaned forward, his tone soft but patronizing. "Sir, I understand this might feel sudden, but we're family. We just want to help." I met his gaze, unblinking. "You don't help someone by showing up with luggage." His smile faltered. Clara cleared her throat. "We just thought maybe you could use company. You've done so much for everyone, Dad. Let us do something for you." There it was again for you. The oldest lie in the book. I leaned back, folding my hands. "Tell me the truth, Clara. What are you really here for?" Her eyes darted to Daniel. He looked down. And in that silence, I got my answer. Money. I didn't need proof. Greed has a smell. It's faint like perfume layered over rot. But once you've lived through it, you never forget it. I let the silence stretch until she started to squirm. "Dad," she said finally, voice trembling slightly, "please don't think the worst. We just want to reconnect." I smiled faintly. "Then why'd you bring suitcases?" The mask cracked for just a second. Her smile fell. Her lips tightened, but she recovered fast. "We were planning to stay the weekend." I nodded slowly. "Of course you were." The rest of the day passed in forced politeness. She cooked dinner, trying to fill the air with old familiarity. Daniel complimented the house, told me how proud he was that I'd done well. It was all noise practice, empty, desperate noise. When night came, I sat alone in my chair, staring at the glow of the lamp reflecting off the window. In the glass, I saw 3 versions of myself, the man who built the man who lost, and the man who refused to lose again. They thought they were walking into a house they could claim. They had no idea they'd stepped into a lesson. Before I went to bed, I walked past the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back, older, colder, quieter. I whispered to myself, "Don't get angry, Thomas. Get ready." Because deep down I knew what was coming. History has a habit of repeating itself, especially when you let people believe your silence means surrender. That night as I turned off the lights, I glanced once more at Helen's photo. Her smile looked softer than usual, almost knowing. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "They won't break this house twice." The first night Clara and Daniel stayed, I barely slept. Their laughter echoed faintly through the hallway, muffled but sharp. It reminded me of another time, the night Michael and Victoria slept upstairs in my room. Different voices, same lesson: peace never dies. It just hides until you learn how to defend it. At sunrise, I brewed my coffee and sat by the window, watching the fog lift off the lake. That view used to bring me comfort. Now it felt like a reminder nothing stays untouched forever. Clara joined me not long after, still in her silk robe, her hair perfect even this early. She carried her phone like a lifeline. "Morning, Dad," she said lightly. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. Morning. Daniel came down moments later, crisp shirt, fake warmth. He sat across from me, his tone all business. "I've been thinking," he said, "we could help you manage your assets. You know, make sure everything's structured right." There it was, barely a day and the masks were slipping already. I stirred my coffee slowly. "That's kind of you, Daniel, but I already have someone." "Who?" he asked too quickly. "Myself," I said. He laughed, that hollow, polite laugh people use when they're uncomfortable. "Come on, Thomas. You've worked hard all your life. You shouldn't have to worry about things like that. Let us take care of it." Clara touched his arm gently, a signal to stop pressing. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We just want to make sure you're okay, Dad. That's all." "I am," I said. And I meant it, because while they thought they were moving in, I was already moving pieces they couldn't see. That afternoon, I called Stephen Callahan, an old friend from Helen's church group, once a private investigator, now a quiet retiree who still had connections everywhere. He answered on the second ring. "Thomas Bennett," he said, his voice a low hum. "Haven't heard that name in a while." "Trouble." "Something like that," I replied. He chuckled. "You catching a thief or a ghost?" "Both," I said. "But the ghost still breathes." He understood immediately. That's the thing about men our age, we don't waste time explaining what betrayal feels like. Within hours, Stephen was on it. He still had access to databases, old favors, and people who owed him their silence. I trusted him more than I trusted anyone else. Meanwhile, I began to act the part they expected of me, an aging man too soft to notice the walls closing in. I let Clara rearrange the pantry, let Daniel review my mail. I said little, but I saw everything. The way they whispered in the hallway. The way Daniel paused before signing his own name on documents. The way Clara used the word "ours" when talking about my home. People show you who they are when they think you've stopped watching. 3 days later, Stephen called. His voice was quiet, careful. "Tom, I've got what you asked for. You might want to sit down." I already was. "They're drowning in debt," he continued. "Nearly 300 grand. Credit cards, personal loans, 2 failed business investments. Daniel's firm hasn't had a legitimate client in almost a year." I stayed silent, listening to the slow click of his keyboard through the receiver. He kept talking. "That's not the worst part. They've been spreading a rumor to a few mutual contacts, claiming you're losing your memory, setting up a narrative. What's the term? Elder incapacity. You know what that means. It means preparation. It means they were building a legal excuse to take control before I was even gone." I let out a slow breath. "How long?" "At least 6 months. They started planting the idea when they found out about your lottery win. They've been planning this for a while. 6 months. A whole half year of pretending to care just to stage a takeover." "Can you get me proof?" I asked. "I already have," he said. "Screenshots, financial filings, text messages. They're sloppy. I'll drop everything off by tomorrow morning." When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Not the hurt kind of silence, the strategic kind. The kind that fills you with clarity so sharp it borders on peace. They'd underestimated the wrong man. That evening, Clara and Daniel returned from town with groceries they hadn't paid for themselves. I watched them unload the bags, expensive brands, unnecessary luxuries. Their movements were rehearsed like actors in a play they'd already decided the ending of. They didn't notice the envelope on the counter. Stephen's report sat inside, sealed and ready. After dinner, I told them I wanted to host a small family meal the next night. Just us, I said, to talk about plans for the future. Clara beamed, mistaking my calm for surrender. Of course, Dad. That sounds wonderful. I smiled faintly. It will be. The next evening, the house smelled of roast beef and Rosemary Helen's old recipe. I set the table with the same dishes we used when Clara was a little girl. Every detail intentional, every memory a mirror. When they arrived at the table, I poured the wine myself. To family, Daniel said with a smirk, raising his glass. To truth, I replied. We ate quietly for a few minutes before I spoke. There's something I'd like to share, I said, sliding 2 manila folders onto the table. Clara blinked. What's this? Some research I've been doing, I said, since you're both so interested in my affairs. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Dad, I don't think. But I interrupted him by opening the first folder. Inside were printouts of their debts, every loan, every unpaid credit card, every bank notice. Clara's fork slipped from her hand. Daniel's face went pale. You've had a rough few years, I said evenly. Seems honesty wasn't part of the plan. Clara stammered. You had no right, I had every right, I cut in. You started this when you showed up at my door with your suitcases. I opened the second folder. It contained transcripts of their messages, the ones where they claimed I was losing my memory, preparing to seize control for my own good. Daniel leaned back, eyes wide. How did you? I've been underestimated my whole life, I said. By my students, by my children. It's how I get things done. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock above us. Finally, I looked at Clara. I'm giving you one chance, I said quietly. To make this right. Her voice trembled. What do you mean tomorrow morning, I said. You'll sign a legal agreement drafted by my lawyer. You'll renounce any financial claim over me or this house. In exchange, I'll give you $25,000, enough to start over. You'll also enter therapy. Real therapy, separately, and you'll pay back every cent you've borrowed dishonestly. Daniel rubbed his temples. That could take years. Then maybe that's how long it'll take you to remember what decency feels like. Clara began to cry small, quiet tears that came too late. For a moment, I almost reached out to comfort her. Almost. But mercy without lesson isn't love, it's permission. And I wasn't giving permission anymore. That night, after they left the table in silence, I sat alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked steadily above me, each sound a reminder that time, not anger, always delivers justice. I folded Stephen's papers neatly and placed them beside Helen's photograph. Her smile caught the lamplight, soft and proud. You were right, I whispered. Patience wins. Tomorrow would bring signatures, lawyers, and closure. But tonight, all I wanted was the quiet hum of peace, the kind that says you didn't shout, you didn't beg, you just endured, and you won. The next morning, the sun rose slower than usual. A thin mist hung over the lake, soft and pale, like the world was holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee, my hands steady, my mind clear. It was the day everything would end quietly, legally, completely. At exactly 8:47, the phone rang. I already knew who it was. Dad Clara's voice came through, fragile but real. We've thought about it. We'll do it, all of it. The therapy, the restitution, the jobs. We want to make this right. I didn't answer immediately. I just listened to her breathing on the other end, the same way I used to listen when she was a child crying over something small and fixable. Only now the damage wasn't small and it wasn't fixable in a day. Finally, I spoke. Clara, I said softly, if I hadn't won the money, if I were still in that small apartment, would you have ever called me silence? Then a whisper, no, probably not. I was too ashamed. That hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that cleaned the wound instead of deepening it. Thank you, I said. That's the truth I needed to hear. We said goodbye quietly. No tears, no promises. Just honesty, the rarest form of love left between us. Later that day, she and Daniel came by to sign the documents. Grace was already there, standing by the counter, calm and professional. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just paper, ink, and consequence. When Daniel picked up the pen, his hand trembled slightly. He looked at me before signing. I never meant to hurt you, Thomas. I nodded. Intentions don't change the outcome. Clara signed next. Her signature was small, hesitant, almost childlike. When she finished, she looked up, eyes red. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered. "No," I said quietly, "but you need it. And I need to know you can still become the person I once believed you were." She nodded, unable to speak. Grace collected the papers and slipped them into her folder with the precision of closure. "We're done," she said simply. The words landed like the final hammer stroke of a craftsman, clean, necessary, final. That evening, when they left, the house felt different again. Not like it did after Michael's departure. That silence had been heavy, uncertain. This one was lighter, measured, earned. I walked through each room, slowly touching the walls as if to thank them for surviving yet another storm. In the living room, sunlight spilled through the window, catching the edge of Helen's photo frame. Her smile glowed faintly under the glass, alive in the light. I stood there for a long time. People think peace returns with fanfare, a sudden rush of joy, a feeling of victory. But peace doesn't roar. It hums, softly, like the sound of your own breath when you finally stop holding it. That night I sat by the window again, coffee in hand, looking out at the dark water. The lake shimmered like polished steel, still and deep. I thought about all the noise that used to fill this house, the arguments, the apologies, the promises. And I realized something: silence isn't emptiness, it's balance. Weeks passed. Grace visited often, bringing groceries, staying for dinner. We talked about small things, the garden, the neighbors, her cases. Once she said, "You know, Dad, you could sell this house and move somewhere quieter." I smiled. There's no quieter place than a home that's finally honest. Michael came by one Sunday afternoon alone. He looked older, calmer, like a man who had finally learned to live within his own skin. He handed me an envelope, his final repayment. "I'm debt-free now," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "So is this house," I replied. We sat on the porch afterward, not saying much. Sometimes peace doesn't need conversation, just presence. Clara wrote a letter a few months later. It wasn't long, but it was sincere. She told me about her new job at a community office, how Daniel was finally working steady hours, how therapy was harder than she expected, but worth it. At the bottom of the page, she'd written one line that made my throat tighten. "I'm rebuilding, Dad. Thank you for teaching me how." I didn't write back. I just folded the letter, placed it under Helen's photo, and whispered, "That's enough." 2 years later, I turned 74. The house still stood strong, a little older, a little quieter, but full of the kind of silence that heals instead of haunts. Every morning, I still brewed my black coffee. Every evening, I still opened the window before bed to let the air in. The curtains swayed gently, like Helen's hand brushing my shoulder. People in town sometimes ask me how I managed to stay calm through it all. I tell them the truth: anger is loud, dignity is silent, and silence lasts longer. Because it does. It outlives betrayal. It outlives deceit. It even outlives pain. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to carry the weight anymore. And that's what I've done, one quiet morning at a time. On my final walk before winter came, I stood by Helen's rose garden. The flowers had wilted, but their scent lingered in the air, faint and familiar. I ran my hand over the old wooden gate we built together and smiled. Everything ends. Houses crumble. Photographs fade. But respect, once reclaimed, never dies. I turned back toward the porch, the afternoon sun warm on my face, and thought of all the storms that had passed through this home. Each one had tried to tear something from me. Each one had failed. Because the strongest kind of power isn't in what you can take. It's in what you can stand to lose and still stay whole. I poured myself one last cup of coffee that day, sat by the window and watched the light fade across the lake. The world was quiet again. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace. And in that stillness, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped fighting. Real revenge isn't fire, it's peace. And peace once earned never leaves.